Just over 3 years since its announcement, the Analogue Duo is finally shipping to customers. As Analogue's FPGA tribute to the PC Engine and TurboGrafx 16, it offers a new way for people to experience a compelling platform that remains largely overlooked by people outside of Japan. But due to its success in the Japanese market, this means that the Analogue Duo has access to a library of over 600 games that include regular HuCards and SuperGrafx HuCards, not to mention, in a first for Analogue, CD games. As usual, Analogue has sent us review units to check out, and, well, the Duo generally provides an excellent experience, but it's certainly not without its quirks and shortcomings. Does it stand up to scrutiny next to original hardware and the excellent Mr. FPGA core? And can it be upgraded with external 4K scaling? Let's find out.
The PC Engine and TurboGrafx 16 were sold by Japanese electronics manufacturer NEC, with the core integrated circuits designed by Hudson Soft, who was also a major game development partner. Hudson's HUC6280 CPU is architecturally related to the 6502 CPU that powers the Famicom and NES, which I think is a big contributor to why the system resonates with me so much. The NES is my favorite console after all, and PC Engine games often have a sort of NES Plus vibe to them. If you bolted on some light 16-bit graphics capabilities on top of the NES's 8-bit CPU, well, that's a vague approximation of what the PC Engine pretty much is. These things, combined with the distinctive tone of the platform's PSG audio, are all part of the character that the Analogue Duo needs to replicate through FPGA-based hardware emulation. And yes, it functions differently from software emulation, but let's call it what it is. It's still emulation. A different sort of emulation that has perks that appeal to some people and not to others, and that's okay. The existence of a method of play that isn't for you doesn't hurt you. Someone who spent more money or less money or no money to play old video games than you isn't less smart than you. They just have different priorities and technical interests. We all benefit from the varied ways there are to replicate game hardware behavior. It means that more people are looking at unresolved and overlooked problems in both software emulation and hardware emulation, and that more people are motivated to make better scaling techniques, better post-processing effects, create fan translations, accessories, and mods for original hardware. New technologies to review mean that people like us test, research, and learn things so that we can then pass that on to you. So whether it's for you or not, I think the release of a system like the Analogue Duo is nonetheless cause for celebration. The thing that immediately stood out to me when first laying eyes on the Japanese-style Analogue Duo was that it was not the modern stark white that I envisioned. It is, in fact, an incredibly close match to the creamy white plastics of the original PC Engine itself, or at least it is to mine. I never really considered whether the PC Engine was always this color, or if they're just a bit off-white from age. It's certainly not the white of an Xbox Series S or even a Dreamcast. It's a warm, cozy color that takes me back to a warmer, cozier time, and I appreciate that it doesn't quite feel like any other system in my setup for HDMI-equipped consoles. Funny enough, it's nearly the same size as the not-so-mini TurboGrafx 16 Mini. Now, what I'm about to focus on is the audio-visual side of things, but Coury will get into accessories, compatibility, and his thoughts on the Analogue OS interface later in the video. So like, if I start getting too into the weeds on that stuff for you, just hang in there, or like, skip ahead if you have to, I guess. Now, some people are probably wondering why a console shipping in 2023, one that was sold as a premium experience, only tops out at 1080p. The silver lining is that Analogue has done such a good job with that 1080p output, it leaves me with little reason to be disappointed that it's not 4K. In the Analogue OS, which debuted with the Analogue Pocket, you have a much less granular control over how the system is configured compared to the Super NT, Mega SG, or NT Mini Noir, but it's also relatively easy to get straight to the settings that you need. And crucially, the default video scaler settings are excellent. Truly. It's configured exactly the way I would have advised Analogue to do it, but there's also just enough flexibility for power users to do more if they wish. In fact, the pixel scaling interpolation manages to be perceptually sharper without shimmering compared to the readily available interpolation filters on Mister, which start to shimmer more obviously if you go sharper than the setting used by the interpolation preset. I'm sure Mister could in theory do the exact same thing the Analogue Duo is doing in theory, but as someone who can't write his own filters, this is what I've got to work with. So if you like a good quality pixel art presentation but hate tweaking stuff, then I think you'll be very happy with the Analogue Duo's out-of-the-box experience. One video feature that I'm super happy to see here is the composite color palette. You see, the PC Engine has a weird relationship with RGB in that its composite and RF video reference a table of colors that is quite different from the RGB palette, which not only looks drastically different, but in the RGB palette, some colors can even be so similar to the point that they're nearly indistinguishable, as has been often demonstrated by a sky gradient in a battle background seen in Startling Odyssey 2. No official method was ever given to utilize the RGB video on the original hardware by NEC, but colors later seen through RGB mods and emulators, even official emulators, are generated in the PC Engine's RGB space due to the ease of implementation. This discrepancy was tackled in recent years by a team that programmatically translated the PC Engine's composite palette into RGB, with the results offered on Katrinx's GitHub. The Mister Turbo Duo core was the first PC Engine emulator to adopt this as the default color palette, and I'm pleased to see that the Analogue Duo has done the same. The interpretation is slightly different though. I don't necessarily think that's good or bad, but it makes me wonder if Analogue didn't use the open source information. This is one area where RGB mods fall short with currently available methods, and it's hard to say if that will ever change. Ultimately, this comes down to personal preference, but aside from authenticity, the composite palette is also much less garish and is more natural looking, so I recommend leaving it on unless you're just curious to see the difference. Similar to the Analogue Pocket, several screen modes are on offer, replicating specific viewing environments that one may have played these games on in the past. Two modes are meant to mimic the handheld Turbo Express and PC Engine LT systems, and while we don't have the means to compare these against the original devices, it's clear that the 1080p output limits their fidelity, so they're more of a novelty and not something that I can envision anyone using seriously. Much more impressive is the CRT filter, which intends to go for a Trinitron-style appearance. You've even got RGB phosphor elements on a faux aperture grille, which is not at all easy to pull off well at 1080p, and the result here is shockingly great considering. The CRT effect also has some light customization available. You can choose a more PVM-like fine aperture grille, but this is a monochromatic effect with no RGB elements due to the resolution limitation. You can also disable the mask and use only scan lines, choose between hard pixel edges and soft edges, soft is essential for CRT effects in my opinion, and toggle between two strengths of scan line depth. You no longer have the scan line sliders of earlier Analogue consoles, but those had no mask effects, and the limited settings on the Duo means that it's almost impossible to make something that looks bad. Brightness seems to be compensated for somewhat when using the CRT effect, but it still dims the picture a bit, and at present there seems to be no manual adjustments available to counter this, which would have been nice, especially for those who might use black frame insertion on their TV for increased motion clarity. After all, we recently discovered that the RetroTink 4K has the ability to claw back a significant amount of perceived brightness when using effects that darken the image, even in standard dynamic range. Interpolated pixel scaling ensures that it's essentially impossible to inadvertently get the dreaded scrolling shimmer no matter how you size up the image. By default, you've got a 4.8x scale of a cropped 224p, which fills the vertical space. If you enable the overscan, which is often drawn in by PC Engine games but rarely for critical graphics, then 240p is scaled up by 4.5x. You can also integer scale and freeform scale if you wish, but non-integer scaling is totally acceptable here for both pixelated looks and scanline looks thanks to the interpolation and modern scanline implementation that doesn't need integer scaling to be perceived as evenly spaced, unlike older scanline techniques. And don't worry, it's also very easy to reset to the default sizing settings if you mess up. If you watched our RetroTink 4K video, you'll know that I spent like half the video on getting amazing 4K results from pixel art games that run at 1080p or less, including from the Analogue NT, Super NT, and Mega SG. So what's great about systems like these and the Analogue Duo is that even though the output may not be up to the current resolution standard, the scaling is flexible enough that the latest external scalers with HDMI input can resample and rescale the image flawlessly. Although the RetroTink 4K is the only one that we have available to verify the results on at the moment. The Analogue Duo presents some challenges in getting perfect 4K results that the other analog consoles do not, but let's start with the easiest method that will work universally across all games. If you want a 4K quality CRT effect, just set the Duo to an integer scale like 4x, pre-scale on the RetroTink 4K to 1/4, size it up proportionally, choose your interpolation method, and add whatever effects you want on top of that. In this case, the Duo's horizontal interpolation works in your favor, but if you want a sharp 4K pixel look, that's going to be a lot trickier because while the most common horizontal resolution for PC Engine games tends to be 256, the system does operate in quite a few various resolution modes, more than the SNES or Genesis typically do. Some games may even use multiple modes, so given that the Duo's interpolation is so sharp, the benefit may be too small to be worth the effort if your goal is just sharper pixels. Though I did figure out a super easy way to tease out the optimal horizontal sizing for perfect sampling by setting the RetroTink 4K's decimation to 3 in, 1 out with a phase of 2. This lets you adjust the horizontal width on the Duo until the pixels appear to suddenly settle into place, perfectly sharp. The trouble then, though, is that aspect ratio ain't right. And while it's something I can kinda adjust on the Tink by eye for now, the adjustment will be different for every horizontal resolution. So if I'm going to do this, I'd prefer to use accurate numbers, but I just don't have time to formulate that kind of math right now. So yeah, basically, I think the main reason to bother with 4K upscaling on the Duo is if you want a more realistic CRT look with more control over scanline depth, misconvergence, mask types, sharpness, brightness, and the option to inject HDR, etc. That stuff, that's all really easy. Sharper 4K pixels, that's the bigger hassle in this particular case, so I'd personally just settle for the Duo's native 1080p output if I were you. Now, there is an alternative method that could potentially be used for 4K scaling, which is the mode where the RetroTink 4K, for instance, can trick analog consoles into thinking it's the analog DAC. The DAC is meant for using systems like Super NT and Mega SG on CRTs by using a digital 240p signal and converting that. But on the RetroTink 4K, this means that it receives a digital 240p signal they can then manipulate, though it can be a bit of a pain to make that function work in more complex video chains, so I consider the pre-scaling methods to be easier. But it's also worth noting that analog products always have a peculiar set of buffer modes that preclude you from running at the true original speed and original refresh rate at the same time when using HDMI output, since they're really particular about hitting 60 Hz even for compatibility purposes, even if that means the system runs a teensy fraction less accurately. The DAC, or something that can stand in for the DAC, is the only way to get these systems to run at the original speed without using the undesirable buffer modes. But, well, The DAC isn't supported in the firmware yet. Oh. Analogue tells us that it'll be universally added in an update to Analogue OS, which will also finally make the DAC work on the Analogue dock, a feature that has been a long old time coming and remains so. So for now, the RetroTink 4K can't mimic the DAC either. Before I hand things off to Coury, let's briefly analyze the Duo's audio characteristics. Many emulated implementations of PC Engine audio have sounded quite grating, leaving a poor impression of the system's capabilities. Luckily, the sound emulation on analog consoles has never sounded unpleasant, I would say, but when it comes to measuring how accurate it is to the real thing, it usually has some deviations in relative channel volume and filtering at higher frequencies that we suspect is tuned in pursuit of a subjective improvement rather than pure accuracy and preservation of the original sound signature. One bummer is that, at launch at least, the audio settings menu is totally bare bones with no ability to balance different sound elements. For instance, MD Fourier analysis through the indispensable 240p test suite shows that, on average, the Analogue Duo's PSG tones are about 5 decibels lower relative to the ADPCM sound channel compared to original hardware. Maybe this was done to improve audibility of things like voice samples, but on the Mega SG and NT Mini systems, Analogue allowed some of these elements to be tweaked and balanced by the user so that you could get a closer match to original hardware if desired. But when it comes down to just enjoying playing the system, all that matters is how it sounds to you. So let's take a listen. Now, watch out. Just so that it doesn't always color your first impression, on this next one, original hardware comes last. Any thoughts so far? Now for some CD games, and this time original hardware comes first again. And I leave you with one more CD game with original hardware last. Something to know is that MiSTer does give you a small amount of control over ADPCM and CD audio levels. So what you hear here isn't the only possibility.
So with the technical prowess and potential laid out before you, it should be pretty obvious that it's got the goods to make games look and feel just the way that they should. I don't think that any PC Engine or TurboGrafx 16 fan will feel disappointed with the core performance or the hardware. After all, Analogue has made a tradition of generally rock-solid systems over the years. Now, I'm going to follow up with some general compatibility testing with the games and hardware that I have on hand here, as well as address some of the quirks that you'll want to keep an eye out for. But first, I do want to take a minute to talk about Analogue OS a little bit, because although we knew that the Duo would be using it, I can't help but feel a little bit sad with the implementation here. Let me explain. When the Pocket and the Analogue OS interface was first announced, it made perfect sense. Yes, the Pocket was oriented like an original Game Boy, but it was created and marketed as one handheld to rule them all. And the general interface that the Analogue OS offered made sense on that screen. Big text, bold toggles. It was visually simple, but appealing in that context. When I first booted up the Duo, I honestly didn't expect the interface to be exactly the same as the Pocket. I thought it would be more tailored visually and functionally to the hardware, in the same way that the NT Noir, Super NT, and Mega SG were celebrations of their heritage and the uniqueness of the hardware. Gone are the little cartridge-shaped loading icons, unique fonts, color schemes, and, love it or hate it, the custom animated boot-up logo. All of this stuff is what makes the analog consoles so special and unique. It feels like a real loss of identity. Speaking of which, when I run the system's HDMI into my Atomos Ninja recorder, the device ID that it sends is Pocket Dock, which does raise some questions. There's also features that haven't been enabled in the 1.0 firmware that we've been using in this video. Stuff like save states and analog DAC support that are Analogue OS level features. These are expected to be added soonish, but it's still kind of strange that they're not here yet. Now, don't get me wrong, the library aspect is super cool. I especially like how it tracks how long you've played each game. The ability to save screenshots to the SD card is also extremely handy, considering how password-heavy HuCard games can be. But enough of that, all right? I'm just some guy sitting here rambling about something that mostly doesn't matter. More important is actually using the Duo and going through the wide range of amazing and interesting games. If this is your intro to the system, then you are in for a real treat. The big question on everyone's mind is going to be, does it work with Crix's Turbo EverDrives? That HuCard slot is awfully narrow, isn't it? Well, firstly, yeah, size is absolutely an issue, but you can remove the shielding to make them fit. Upon doing this, I found that my Turbo EverDrive version 1.2 wasn't recognized at all. It's from 2013 after all, but I bet if you have a version 2 that came out afterwards, that'll work. Although I don't have one on hand to test personally. Now, the Turbo EverDrive Pro boots up just fine and works, but there are a couple of minor asterisks. You'll need to activate the HuCard audio toggle in the audio settings to get CD audio to play through it, which may add a little bit of analog noise. I also found that if I used the Duo's in-game menu to reboot the EverDrive and tried to load up another CD game, it would think that there is a CD-ROM attached to the system. The only way to fix this was to remove and reinsert the EverDrive. So you'll either want to deal with that or use the Turbo Pro's built-in menu. Except some hotkey combos might not work because it conflicts with the Duo's functionality. But then I got to thinking, with how the Turbo EverDrive Pro works with Super CD games, using an FPGA to emulate aspects of the hardware, then wouldn't it only be using the HuCard side of Analogue's FPGA core? So really, is the only way to truly use the CD aspect of Analogue's core is to use the original discs or burn discs. And on that note, it's a good thing that, just like the original console, the Duo will work with CDRs. I mean, who knows, maybe some of you have them still laying around. And if you do, you should definitely check out the English translation patch for Ys 4, The Dawn of Ys. Runs perfectly, at least as far as I've played.
Huh? They've brought me a playmate, eh? Good, I've almost been bored to death.
Oh right, save files, my favorite. CD games will create a 2 kilobyte save file on the SD card for each CD game that you play, so you never have to worry about running out of backup RAM. If you used a Tenekoe bank to back up your saves in the past, they will dump straight to the SD card when you restore a bank to the console. Then you can pop out the SD card and change that Tenekoe bank save file to match the game name as written in the library, and you should be good to go. The Analogue Duo can't be powered by straight USB like the Super NT and Mega SG. thanks to a more power-hungry CD-ROM drive. Instead, it's powered by USB-C in conjunction with an included power delivery power plug. One thing that I learned after some odd behavior from the Duo is that it will not work with all USB-C cables. They aren't created equal. I mean, I thought it was going to work with the 100-watt capable Anchor charger cables that I had, but I still ran into several power-related issues, culminating with my Ease 3 disc merely being present in the CD drive, causing the whole system to crash and shut down. The main problem with this is that it would crash and shut down immediately after rebooting. I was able to get it out finally by reading the manual, which states that you can put a simple text file in the root of the SD card with the file name duo_eject. This worked, and I got my disc out. I didn't understand the cause of this problem until an Analogue rep told me to make sure that I was using the included USB cable with the system because it, quote, had a really beefy conductor in it. Lo and behold, this cleared up the issues that I was having. Even when working properly though, inserting and ejecting discs doesn't quite feel as premium and smooth as the drives on consoles from major manufacturers. It doesn't seem like it would damage your discs or anything, but you have to push that disc in really far for it to take it. And it just barely ejects enough for you to grab the edge of the inner ring. A top-loading design like the original consoles had would feel more reassuring to use long term. We've tested some discs that are not exactly in perfect condition, which may cause them to hang or fail to load on the scene. And to be fair, that would happen on original hardware too, but we'd hope that maybe the Duo's fresh laser might have some better luck. On the controller front, Analogue sent us a couple of the 8BitDo PC Engine style 2.4G wireless controllers to use with our Duo review units. Although I should be clear that the console does not include one in the box. If you synced up any controller with a home button, you can even use that to turn on the Duo remotely. While we can't easily perform precise lag tests, we've had no issues with wireless stability or responsiveness. A home button also allows for additional shortcuts, like holding it down and pressing left or right to switch between different screen modes, or pressing it up or down, which will save and load your current state. But again, that aspect in particular isn't working with our current firmware build. Those previously mentioned in-game screenshots can be saved by pressing Run and the home button at the same time. In addition, there's a port for an original Japanese controller, which can be adapted to the larger TurboGrafx port if needed, and 2 USB ports in the rear for controller use. There's also built-in support for up to 4 Bluetooth or 2.4G wireless controllers, so you can use several controllers you probably already own, like modern PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo controllers. Heck, the USB in back will even work with the PC Engine mini controller. In some situations, button mappings may not be what you'd prefer, and in the current firmware, the option to change them is currently grayed out. Even though the very first PC Engine controllers had no turbo switches, I think it's safe to say that turbo functionality went on to be considered an official feature of the platform. The 8BitDo controllers have a second set of rapid fire buttons, but the fire rate doesn't seem to match that of any of the speeds on the original controllers. And yeah, we checked 8BitDo's site for firmware updates, and there weren't any. So for the Duo to be a full replacement for the original hardware, gameplay strategies that involve the rapid fire features should behave as expected. We didn't even think of this as being something that could go wrong until Try wasn't able to stop the boulder at the end of level 2 in Legendary X with the attack button on max turbo, which makes this part a whole lot easier on original hardware. Luckily, the expected behavior can be restored using the port intended for original controllers and activating the pass-through mode in the menu. This removes the Analogue OS layer between the controller and the FPGA core, disabling hotkeys and menu access for that play session, but allowing accessories for that port to behave as originally intended, including turbo fire rates. Analogue tells us that there's currently a limitation when using maximum turbo through other methods, like wireless and USB controllers, so we'll be curious if that can be fixed. By the way, you'll also have to use pass-through mode for multi-taps and other accessories that just aren't regular controllers, but you can connect up to 4 controllers wirelessly or 2 via USB, so unlike original hardware, which only has 1 controller port, it's possible to play multiplayer games without a multi-tap. Also, while you can't mix a real multi-tap through the controller port with USB or wireless controllers, you can use a single wired controller alongside wireless controllers. But what's the general consensus on game compatibility? Any weird issues crop up? Well, after some testing across a number of real and burned games, here's what we found. The PC Engine development community has put together a running list of common trouble spots for emulators. I've taken some items from this list and pitted the Analogue Duo against an unmodified Duo RX to see if it works as it should. In Mugen Senshi Valis, lip sync gets thrown out of whack during the opening after Yuko arrives at the school. Granted, my Duo RX could probably stand to have its capacitors replaced, but I think the Analogue Duo actually looks more in sync than the original hardware, at least to my eye.
Reiko, あなたこそ傘なんかさして、雨はもう止んだわよ。いいのよ。どうせまたすぐ降るんだもの。そっか。Reiko, あなたこそ傘なんかさして、雨はもう止んだわよ。いいのよ。どうせまたすぐ降るんだもの。
On certain emulators, during the opening cinema in Last Alert, the Colonel Kadad VO starts too early after this guy gets gunned down by the helicopter. I feel bad for the guy, but this looks good to me on the Duo.
Colonel Kadad of the Republic of Libid, Mr. Lee of the Hong Kong Mafia.
In downtown Neketsu Monogatari, with the text speed set to fast, if you enter a bookstore and leave quickly, the clerk's voice will continue to talk. This is due to bad seek timing. But on the Duo, everything sounds good.
いらっしゃいませ。こんにちは。お決まりです。またのご来店をお待ちしております。
Out of my own testing, the most egregious issue that I ran into was with Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective Volume 2. The audio and video slowly desync during the introduction FMV.
They too will be extremely useful in our work. At the start of the big...
After a while, it just glitches out and the whole scene starts over again. The awesome bonus games that were included on the PC Engine Mini, including new arcade ports of Gradius and Fantasy Zone, work via an EverDrive. These extra games were done in-house by M2 themselves and are very much worth playing, especially Salamander. The once thought lost Dino Force was rediscovered and finished by the original designer in 2022. Play it via an EverDrive or PCEworks published HuCards, and you should have no problem. An underappreciated feature that I forgot about till now on the Duo is how it handles the system cards and arcade card. By handling it, I mean you just simply set it to auto and never even have to think about it, ever. It'll pick the right card for games like Sapphire and the various Super CD-ROM titles. But if you want to force it to a specific system card, like if you wanted to play the Chibi game in Rondo Blood, you can do that too. SuperGrafx support functions similarly. On and off mimic the 1 and 2 switch on a real SuperGrafx system. Leave it on auto and you'll get full compatibility while reaping the benefits of the hardware. And you don't even have to worry about bugs like the black screen crash in Space Harrier. Those NES to PCE ports will work on an EverDrive as well. They're a novelty for sure and are worth checking out just to hear the butchered sound. But hey, maybe this makes up for a lack of open FPGA support, right? I'm just kidding. In general, homebrew like FX Unit Yuki and pre-production discs seem to work just as they should. And finally, hot off the presses is Tengai Makio, or the Far East of Eden fan translation. This was a rare opportunity to see if something that absolutely could never have been tested on the hardware prior would work. And who knows, maybe I'm the first person ever to play this fan translation on an Analogue Duo. Although it's way too early to check it thoroughly, initial impressions are really good. It seems to function just as I assume it should. So okay, yeah, the Duo covers a lot of bases, although it doesn't initially seem all that complex at a glance. The core itself is extremely solid, but I'm certainly curious to see what kind of features are added in the future, like maybe an audio CD interface. That'd probably be worthless to most people, but if you got the hardware in there, why not? I think it'd be fun.
The Duo finally completes Analogue's FPGA trifecta of the core iconic 16-bit generation consoles, or at least the consoles that were originally marketed as being 16-bit anyway. You know, I suspect that a significant portion of Analogue's audience are people who demand an excellent experience, but would also prefer to just be handed to them with no need to touch any settings. And on that front, the Analogue Duo seriously delivers. But it offers just enough flexibility through its sparse menu for those of us who want to go further, and with very few ways to get a bad result. So maybe it came a bit late, launching with some incomplete features, a slot too small for EverDrives without stripping them down to the board, and video output specs that a lot of people will see as being out of date. But there are workarounds for almost all shortcomings, and we're glad that it's finally here. Whether it will soldier on for decades as a long-term replacement for dying PC Engine CD-ROM drives remains to be seen, but we can hope so. Anyway, I guess it's the Analogue 3D up next, huh? It'll be quite the event, I'm sure, whenever it might drop. And we'll see you there.